On the surface, Emily Wheeler appeared to be the ideal mother. She was the picture of suburban perfection, a woman in her early 30s who had devoted her life to raising her 8-year-old daughter, Lily. Their home, a charming 2-story house in a quiet neighborhood, was always pristine. Emily was known for her meticulousness, her attention to detail in everything she did, from the way the flowers in her garden were arranged to the way she ensured that Lily's clothes were always neat and clean. Neighbors often admired how Emily seemed to have it all under control, balancing motherhood and the responsibilities of home life with ease. Lily, a bright-eyed girl with golden curls and an infectious laugh, seemed like any other child. She was always seen skipping around the neighborhood, her smile a beacon of innocence. People often commented on how sweet she was, her shy demeanor hiding a spark of curiosity and warmth that drew everyone in. The two of them were inseparable, always seen together in public, walking hand in hand or sitting in the park. Emily often took pride in her daughter's accomplishments, boasting about her good grades and good behavior to anyone who would listen. But while Emily appeared to be the perfect mother, there was an underlying tension that few noticed. The absence of Lily's father, Mark Wheeler, was a constant subject of speculation. Emily never spoke about him, and those who asked were met with vague, uncomfortable answers. Mark had been gone for over a year now, but no one could recall the last time they'd seen him. Emily's responses were always the same: he was working on an important project, or he was away on business. Neighbors, though, began to whisper. Some said they had heard raised voices coming from the house late at night. Others believed Emily was hiding something, that Mark had simply disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The rumors didn't bother Emily. She had learned to deflect such questions with practiced ease. Her focus was on Lily, and as far as Emily was concerned, their little world was enough. However, things began to change. Lily, once a vibrant and carefree child, started showing signs of distress. She would wake up in the middle of the night, trembling and sweaty, as if she had seen something terrifying. Her behavior at school became erratic, and teachers noticed her becoming more withdrawn. At first, Emily dismissed it as a phase, just a result of the pressures of growing up, but soon her daughter's fear escalated. It was during this time that the first signs of a breakdown in their seemingly perfect world began to appear. Lily, who once adored spending time with her mother, began to resist spending time alone with Emily. She would often complain of stomach aches or headaches, things that seemed to come out of nowhere. Emily attributed it to the stress of being a young child in a fast-paced world, but deep down, she knew something was wrong. She couldn't shake the feeling that Lily was hiding something from her, something that was making her increasingly afraid of the world around her. As weeks passed, Emily began to change as well. She became more protective, watching over Lily with a keen eye, questioning her about her friends and what she did when they were apart. There were moments of irrationality, bursts of anger when Emily thought Lily was being evasive or secretive. Neighbors began to notice the shifts in Emily's behavior. There were days when Emily appeared unnervingly calm, her face expressionless as she sat on her porch, staring into the distance. On other days she was on edge, her movements sharp and her conversations clipped. The facade that she had so carefully built began to crumble, and the cracks in her seemingly perfect life started to show. One evening, as the sun set and the neighborhood quieted, Emily and Lily were seen walking back home. Lily looked up at her mother, her eyes filled with something that resembled fear, but she said nothing. Emily held her hand tightly, but the connection between them no longer seemed as comforting as it once had. There was a distance now, a gap between them that no one could understand. It was the beginning of something much darker than anyone could have anticipated. The house that once seemed like a haven was now a prison, and the walls that protected them from the outside world began to close in. Something was wrong, and Emily knew it. But what she didn't know was that the truth was more terrifying than she could have ever imagined. The day Lily went missing, the quiet suburban neighborhood was thrown into turmoil. It started with Emily's frantic call to the police. She claimed that she had been in the kitchen preparing dinner, and when she went to check on Lily, the girl was gone. The front door was unlocked, and there were no signs of a struggle inside the house. Emily, in a panic, told authorities that she had searched the neighborhood but couldn't find any trace of her daughter. It seemed like a classic case of a child wandering off, but there was something unsettling about her story. The police acted swiftly, organizing a search party that scoured the area for hours. Detective Miller was called in to lead the investigation. He was a seasoned detective, known for his sharp mind and instinct for picking up on the smallest details. As he arrived at the scene, the air was thick with tension. Neighbors gathered around, offering information and speculation, but none of it was helpful. The more Detective Miller observed Emily, the more suspicious he became. She appeared nervous, constantly glancing around as if expecting someone to appear. But when he spoke with her, her answers seemed rehearsed, like she had anticipated every question. At first, Emily's demeanor was one of helplessness. She insisted that she didn't know where Lily was, that she had no idea who could have taken her. But as the hours passed and the search continued without any solid leads, her behavior began to shift. Emily grew increasingly agitated, avoiding direct eye contact and becoming defensive when questioned. It was subtle at first, small, barely noticeable changes in her mannerisms, but Detective Miller was no stranger to such behavior. The cracks in her story were starting to show. Despite Emily's insistence that she was being targeted by an unknown person, no one could find any concrete evidence to support her claims. No one had seen anything unusual in the neighborhood, and there were no signs of forced entry into the house. Detective Miller began to wonder if Emily was hiding something. He revisited the house and spoke to neighbors, but no one had witnessed anything strange. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, and there was a sense of isolation around it. Emily's explanation seemed to unravel with each passing hour. Why had the door been left unlocked? Why hadn't she heard anything during the time Lily disappeared? Days turned into weeks, and the search for Lily grew colder. The media picked up the story, turning it into a sensation that captivated the entire community. Every corner of the neighborhood was combed, but still, there was no sign of Lily. As time passed, more and more people began to suspect Emily. Some whispered that she had something to do with her daughter's disappearance, while others believed it was just a tragic accident. But one thing was certain: everyone felt the eerie silence that surrounded Emily. It was as if she were hiding something dark that she wasn't ready to face. Then, one evening, Emily made a shocking revelation. She claimed that she had been receiving strange, threatening letters for weeks, letters that seemed to know details about her life that no one could have known. The letters spoke of punishment and warned her that she would pay for her sins. Emily insisted that the letters were connected to Lily's disappearance, that someone was framing her for something terrible. She had no idea who could be behind the letters, but she was sure they were the key to understanding what had happened to her daughter. Detective Miller took the letters seriously and had them analyzed, but nothing about the letters seemed to match any known criminal patterns. The handwriting was erratic, and the threats were vague, as if written by someone trying to create fear without revealing their true intentions. There was no return address, no clues that could point to a specific person. It was as if the letters were crafted to confuse and terrorize Emily, but they provided no tangible evidence. The more Emily spoke of the letters, the more suspicious she became. Her story seemed too well crafted, too consistent. It was as if she had been rehearsing it, waiting for the right moment to reveal it to the authorities. And as Detective Miller dug deeper, he began to realize that the letters were just another layer in a complex web of deception. But what could Emily be hiding? What was she trying to protect? And why did she seem so intent on keeping it hidden? The investigation seemed to be at a dead end. Lily's disappearance remained a mystery, and Emily's growing paranoia made it increasingly difficult to separate fact from fiction. Detective Miller couldn't shake the feeling that Emily knew more than she was letting on, but he had no concrete evidence to prove it. The search for Lily was suspended, but Miller's gut told him that the truth was much closer than anyone could imagine. It wasn't a matter of finding the evidence, it was a matter of understanding Emily's hidden darkness. The investigation into Lily's disappearance had taken a dark turn when, after weeks of fruitless searching, a discovery was made that no one could have predicted. It was during a routine sweep of the nearby woods an area that had been thoroughly checked before, that a hidden grave was found. The police had been following up on an anonymous tip, but it was a stroke of luck that led them to the secluded spot deep in the forest. As the ground was disturbed and the earth removed, a chilling scene unfolded before the authorities. Lily's body was uncovered, lifeless and cold. Detective Miller's heart sank as he took in the scene. The grave was shallow, hastily dug, as if the perpetrator had been in a rush. But what disturbed him most was how perfectly concealed the location had been, so well hidden, in fact, that it was almost as if someone with intimate knowledge of the area had placed Lily there. The first thing Miller noticed when examining the site was the absence of any struggle. There were no signs that Lily had fought back or tried to escape. The surrounding ground was undisturbed, as though she had been placed there gently, not tossed or buried in a frenzy. The coroner's report revealed that Lily had died from suffocation. There were no signs of blunt force trauma or physical injury, but her small frame showed signs of distress. She had been tightly bound, her wrists marked with deep red impressions, as if something had been tightly wrapped around them. But the strangest detail was the symbol drawn in chalk near her body, a strange, cryptic figure that looked like a mixture of ancient runes and religious symbols. This symbol would turn out to be the key that unlocked a dark connection to Emily's past, one that no one, including Emily herself, was prepared for. Detective Harlow, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for solving the most complex cases, was brought in to take a fresh look at the situation. He immediately picked up on the unusual circumstances surrounding Lily's death. Harlow was struck by the lack of evidence pointing to an outside attacker. No forced entry, no signs of struggle, and no indication that anyone had been in the house aside from Emily and Lily. It was almost as if Lily's death was orchestrated from within the walls of the very home she had once called safe. Harlow's suspicions were further piqued by the symbol found near Lily's body. He had seen similar markings before during a case years earlier involving a religious cult that had been involved in ritualistic practices. The connection was uncanny. Was Emily involved in some kind of cult or religious belief system that had led to her daughter's tragic death? The more Harlow dug into Emily's past, the darker the story became. Emily's life before becoming a mother was a puzzle. As Harlow uncovered more details, he learned that Emily had grown up in a strict, religious household. Her parents were devout and held beliefs that bordered on extreme. Emily had been raised under a rigid set of rules that dictated every aspect of her life, from how she dressed to what she believed. She had spent years in what could only be described as isolation, with little to no contact with the outside world. She was taught to view the world as a place of temptation and sin, and her parents enforced a belief system that involved harsh punishments for even the smallest transgressions. Emily's past was one of repression and control, and she had grown up believing that love could only be attained through fear and submission. As Emily matured, she distanced herself from her upbringing, but the roots of her past beliefs never fully disappeared. She married Mark Wheeler, and together they had Lily. But the same rigid mindset that had shaped Emily's early years began to take root in her relationship with her daughter. As Lily grew older and began to show signs of independence, Emily became increasingly controlling. She saw her daughter's desire for autonomy as a threat to the perfect image she had created. Lily's small acts of rebellion, like wanting to play outside or make her own decisions, were seen by Emily as violations of the rules. In her mind, she needed to maintain control at all costs. Her vision of the perfect family depended on it. The more Harlow uncovered, the clearer it became that Emily's relationship with her daughter was not one of love, but of domination. She had projected her own unresolved fears and traumas onto Lily, believing that by keeping her under her control, she could protect her from the dangers of the world. But this protection came at a steep price: Lily's innocence and freedom. And as Emily's need for control escalated, so did her violent tendencies. The realization hit Harlow like a ton of bricks. Emily hadn't just killed Lily out of desperation or fear. She had done it to maintain control and attempt to keep her daughter from growing into someone who might eventually challenge the suffocating rules that governed their lives. The ritualistic symbol near Lily's body wasn't just a random marking, it was a symbol of control, of ownership, and of the twisted beliefs that had shaped Emily's entire existence. As the investigation delved deeper into Emily's mind, the true horror of the crime became clear. The question now wasn't just who had killed Lily, but why. And the answer, as horrifying as it was, lay buried in Emily's own past, a past that had come back to claim her daughter. The investigation was far from over, but with each revelation, it became more and more apparent that Emily had been the mastermind behind her daughter's murder, driven by a need for control and a twisted vision of love. As the investigation into Lily's murder deepened, Emily's behavior became even more erratic, casting a long shadow over the case. Detective Harlow had begun to piece together the chilling puzzle of Emily's past and her twisted mindset, but there was still something that didn't add up. While Emily continued to maintain her innocence, every detail of her story seemed to unravel further with each passing day. Emily's paranoia intensified. She became reclusive, avoiding neighbors and reporters who had once clamored for her attention. Her once perfect house, which had always been immaculate, began to show signs of neglect. Windows were left closed and covered in dust, the once gleaming floors became scuffed and dirty, and the air inside felt thick with tension. Neighbors who had once praised Emily for her careful attention to detail now whispered about her strange behavior. She no longer smiled when she passed by, her eyes empty and haunted. It was clear that the woman they once thought they knew had completely changed. Despite the growing sense of suspicion, Emily refused to cooperate fully with the investigation. Detective Harlow, however, wasn't about to let her stonewalling distract him. He had begun to uncover disturbing details about Emily's mental state, her history of psychiatric issues, the troubling messages in the letters she had received, and the presence of the cult-like symbols connected to her past. As Harlow sifted through her history, he found evidence that Emily had been under psychiatric care years before. But what disturbed him most was her therapist's report, which had gone largely unnoticed by the authorities until now. The report revealed that Emily had been seeing a counselor under a false name for several months before Lily's death. In these sessions, Emily confessed to disturbing thoughts about her daughter. She spoke of feeling trapped by her role as a mother and confessed that, in her darkest moments, she had entertained the idea of harming Lily. The therapist had raised concerns about Emily's mental state, but before anything could be done, Emily had abruptly stopped attending therapy sessions. The therapist had been alarmed by the sudden cessation of treatment, but by then it was too late. The damage had been done. The more Harlow uncovered, the more it became clear that Emily had been unraveling for some time. It was as though her mind had been pushed to the edge by years of repressed anger, trauma, and fear. She had grown obsessed with the idea of control, of keeping Lily dependent on her and suffocating her in the process. When Lily began to show signs of independence, Emily saw it as a direct challenge to the world she had built. Her actions, as it turned out, were driven by an overpowering need to dominate, to retain control over every aspect of Lily's life. Emily's obsession with perfectionism became more evident as Harlow delved deeper into her past. She had been raised in an environment where perfection was demanded at all costs. Her parents had instilled in her a sense of guilt whenever she strayed from their rigid expectations. It wasn't enough for Emily to be a good mother, she had to be the perfect mother, the perfect woman, the perfect person. Anything less was failure, and failure was unacceptable. As a result, her relationship with Lily became one of control, manipulation, and eventually cruelty. Detective Harlow also learned that Emily had spent a significant portion of her life in isolation. After her marriage to Mark Wheeler had crumbled, she had withdrawn even further from the world. Mark's disappearance, which had seemed so mysterious at first, began to make sense. Emily had pushed him away, just as she had pushed everyone else away, because he didn't fit into the perfect life she had created. Mark had been a symbol of imperfection, and Emily couldn't tolerate it. His absence, which had once seemed like a tragedy, was now seen as a direct consequence of Emily's need to control every aspect of her world. As Harlow continued his investigation, he found that Emily's guilt was as layered as her deception. The realization hit him hard. Emily had seen her daughter as both a reflection of herself and a threat. Lily's desire for freedom, her natural inclination to grow and develop, was seen by Emily as a rebellion against the life she had carefully crafted. To Emily, love was control, and any deviation from that was something to be eliminated. It was the tragic logic that led her to suffocate her daughter, both literally and figuratively, in her desperate attempt to preserve the twisted vision of family she had created. Meanwhile, Emily's strange, almost robotic demeanor continued to mystify those around her. She no longer seemed to mourn the loss of Lily, as if the emotional connection between mother and daughter had been severed long ago. Instead, she seemed consumed by a deep, obsessive focus on herself, on maintaining the image of a perfect mother, even in the face of her daughter's brutal murder. This lack of remorse was perhaps the most chilling aspect of the case. It was as if Emily's capacity for love had been warped beyond recognition, her attachment to Lily reduced to nothing more than an extension of her own need for control. By now, the pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. Detective Harlow knew that Emily's guilt was no longer in question, it was a matter of proving it. But the true horror of the case lay not just in the murder itself, but in the twisted mind behind it. Emily's ability to manipulate the truth, her refusal to acknowledge the reality of her actions, was a chilling glimpse into the depths of her insanity. The investigation was nearing its end, but the truth was far more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. The final moments of Emily Wheeler's story would be the culmination of months of relentless investigation, and as Detective Harlow prepared to confront her with the truth, the tension in the air was palpable. The case that had begun as a missing persons report had now transformed into a full-scale homicide investigation, and Emily's lies had been meticulously unraveled, layer by layer. Harlow knew that Emily had crossed a line that could never be undone, but what shocked him most was the absolute absence of remorse. Emily seemed to have distanced herself completely from any emotional connection to her daughter's death, and this chilling detachment made the case even more disturbing. When Emily was finally arrested, the community's reaction was one of disbelief. Neighbors, who had once considered her the epitome of motherhood, now whispered in hushed tones, struggling to reconcile the image of the loving mother they had known with the woman standing in front of them, her expression emotionless and cold. Emily's arrest sent shockwaves through the small town, leaving a community stunned and grieving for the loss of a child who had once been the symbol of innocence and joy. As Emily sat in the interrogation room, Detective Harlow's mind raced through the final pieces of the investigation. There was no more room for doubt. The evidence was overwhelming: her psychiatric history, the disturbing letters, the cult-like symbols, and the shocking discovery of Lily's body. But what Harlow couldn't fathom was Emily's cold indifference. He had expected some form of guilt, some crack in her facade of perfection, but instead she sat there, her eyes vacant, her posture rigid, as if she were completely disconnected from the horror she had inflicted. Harlow pushed forward, asking Emily the questions that had haunted him for months. What had led her to take her daughter's life? Why had she resorted to such extreme measures to maintain control over Lily? Emily, however, said nothing. Her lips remained sealed, and her eyes flickered only once or twice, almost as if she were calculating the cost of every word she might say. It was clear that Emily was a master of manipulation, even now. She understood that any confession would implicate her more deeply, but she also knew that her silence would only add to the mystery, leaving everyone around her to continue guessing. The trial, when it came, was a spectacle that captivated the nation. Emily, once the perfect suburban mother, was now the subject of intense scrutiny. The prosecution laid out the case with precision, presenting the damning evidence: Emily's past, her psychiatric reports, the chilling details of Lily's death, and the unmistakable link between Emily's need for control and the tragic murder. It was a case that left little room for interpretation, but Emily remained stoic throughout the proceedings. She showed no signs of emotion, no hint of sorrow or regret. Her lawyer attempted to argue that Emily had been suffering from severe mental illness, hoping to secure a lesser sentence by painting her as a woman consumed by forces beyond her control. But the prosecution was relentless, painting a portrait of a woman who had methodically planned and executed the murder of her own daughter. The defense's strategy failed to sway the jury. Emily's detachment, her cold demeanor in the face of such unimaginable horror, spoke volumes. The jury deliberated for hours, but the outcome was inevitable. Emily Wheeler was convicted of first-degree murder, and the sentence was swift life in prison without the possibility of parole.